Okay. Okay. First of all, I want to thank everyone for coming today, this evening. It's a tough time of day, but hopefully you'll all share the information that you get. And I would like to thank Joanna for her dedication. And just a bit about Joanna, she's a volunteer with Be Smart for Kids since 2019. When I asked her, why did she get involved? She said, because I have boys. And it's a worry. So I really do empathize with her. And really, I really want to just introduce Joanna Taczanowsky and let her start with the program. She said she's happy to take questions as you have them. And please begin, Joanna.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me. I will start the PowerPoint so you won't see me, but you'll hear me. And by all means, if you can have a question and you want to chime in, I won't see a hand raised or anything, but that's fine. Otherwise, I'll sort of go through it. And then if anybody has any questions or comments at the end, we can do that too. So I will share. And Be Smart is a program developed by Everytown for Gun Safety. Just go with that. The Gun Safety Support Fund to bring together parents and all adults concerned about kids, guns, and safety. I'm Joanna. I'm up in East Granby, and thanks again for having me. Welcome. We all want kids to grow up happy and healthy. We each have the right to make responsible decisions about how to protect our homes, families, and communities, including whether or not to have a gun in our home. If we can prevent even one child gun death or injury, it's our responsibility to do so. We're not here to talk about laws or policies tonight, so for now we'll set those aside. This is why we're here to talk about Be Smart. Over half of all gun deaths in America are suicide, so we must break the silence around suicide. Here are some important resources to write down or take a picture of in case they might help you or someone you care about. We also have handout materials with more information, and this slide will appear once more at the end of the presentation if it might be helpful then. Here in Connecticut, Be Smart has partnered with organizations such as PT Partners in Bridgeport and the Avon Police Department in Avon to help spread the Be Smart message and give out hundreds of gun locks as well as information. Connecticut is also shopping language to multiple police departments across the state, looking for feedback on how Be Smart information and the message can be amplified through the social media of local police departments. It's a heartbreaking fact that in the US, firearms are the leading cause of death for children. This is a public health crisis. More than 1,800 children under the age of 18 are killed with guns every year, an average of 5 children a day. When children are killed with guns, the majority of those deaths, 54%, are homicides. That's 1,000 children per year. Additionally, nearly 700 children die by firearm suicide each year, and 100 are unintentionally shot and killed. We're here today to talk about how we can prevent tragedies like that. From the Washington Post, February 14 of this year, the total number of children exposed to gun violence at school has risen from 187,000 in 2018, that included 18 years of data, to 338,000 now, just 5 years later. While school shootings and mass shootings typically make national headlines, almost all child unintentional shooting deaths occur at the home. And the Secret Service found that 3/4 of school shooters acquired their firearm from the home of their parents or a close relative. So it all comes back to home. Kids that bring guns to school and expose their classmates and school to gun violence, and kids that unintentionally shoot themselves or someone else at home, they're getting their guns from home. So this can be an emotional issue, and we all come from different walks of life. Many of you are parents or grandparents, some of you may be gun owners, some not. Some may have a personal experience with guns, and some may have been impacted by gun violence. We believe that most gun owners want to be responsible gun owners, so we're here today to talk about what all of us, gun owners, non-gun owners alike, can do to make sure children and teens do not have unsupervised access to guns. And for a few minutes, we can look at some examples of what gun violence in our community looks like. These are some local examples where kids around our communities and our country are getting their hands on guns they shouldn't be. These are the stories we want to avoid and why we're here. We can all take action in our homes and our communities to keep kids safe. So even if you don't own a gun in your home, or if you do, and now you're already practicing safe storage, what can we all do right now? Together, we can be smart. Let's start with the S, secure your guns in homes and vehicles. 13 million households with children contain at least one gun, and the majority of children in gun-owning households know where the gun is stored. So what do we mean by securing guns? A gun should always be stored securely, meaning it is inaccessible to kids, making sure kids are never in the presence of unsecured guns. Hiding a gun is not securing a gun. We know that you may have specific questions about what safe storage looks like in practice, so here are some examples. Contrary to popular belief, locking up guns does not prevent gun owners from readily accessing their guns. There's a common myth that storage devices negate the self-defense purpose of owning a gun by putting barriers between the gun owner and their means of defense. The reality is there are many affordable options for secure gun storage that provide owners with access to guns in a matter of seconds while still preventing access by children and people at increased risk of harming themselves or others. It's possible that unsecured guns may actually increase the likelihood of crime and violence through an increased risk of gun theft. Locking up guns helps to reduce the risk of firearm suicide, unintentional firearm injury, and it also helps prevent firearm theft. Did you know that at least 2 guns are stolen every 15 minutes? It's important to also remember to lock any guns in cars. More than half of stolen guns are taken from cars. Just putting a gun under a seat or in a glove compartment is not considered safe storage. There are car gun lock boxes available for purchase at most retail and sporting goods stores. Here are some additional examples of how to store guns safely, which means unloaded and locked. M is for modeling responsible behavior. Every law-abiding adult has the right to decide whether or not to have a gun in the home, but you can't rely on curious kids not to find a gun. As an adult, you can teach kids what to do and also do everything you can to prevent them from being in a situation where they're confronted with an unlocked loaded gun. Kids know where their parents store their guns, and more than 1/3 reported handling their parents' gun, many doing so without the knowledge of their parents. Nearly 1/4 of parents did not know that their children had handled the gun in their house. It's always an adult's responsibility to prevent unauthorized access to guns. Talk to your kids about gun safety, but remember that's a precaution, not a guarantee. One study found that young children who go through a week-long gun safety training course are just as likely as children with no training to approach or play with a handgun when they find one. Modeling responsible behavior means that smart adults make sure kids don't have the opportunity to access guns. That said, you can't control the environment that your child is in all the time, so you should teach them not to touch a gun if they come across one, real or pretend, and give them the tools to get out of a dangerous situation, like alerting an adult. But as an adult, it's your responsibility to do everything you can to prevent them from getting in a dangerous situation to begin with. We also have handouts on best practices for talking to children and teens about guns. But as we've mentioned, there are approximately 4.6 million US children living in a household with at least one loaded, unlocked gun. That's why you need to ask about firearms in homes your children or grandchildren visit, the A in SMART. Equally important to make headway in normalizing the conversation around secure storage is offering the information about your own home. In conversations around food, TV, drop-off times, you can offer, "My home is safe," or "We secure all our firearms," or "We don't own any firearms." This can be extremely helpful in continuing the conversation and makes it less awkward for someone having to ask you. Some things we already ask about might be pets, pools, foods, or car seats for rides. Adding a secure gun storage question can be life-saving. Asking or offering this information before you're at the home of a friend or family member gives you enough time to change plans if need be, and it's much less awkward. If your child had a severe cat allergy, waiting till you're on the doorstep to ask, "You don't have any cats, do you?" can make for a very uncomfortable conversation if they do. It's not a judgment, your kids just can't be around cats. But if you ask this in advance, the play date can be moved to a playground, the library, or your house. If you're visiting a family member you haven't seen in a while, asking again is always important as well. You don't want to show up and be surprised. Plans can be changed when you ask ahead of time. Getting to someone's doorstep and then asking, "Do you have any unsecured guns?" is difficult and uncomfortable to deal with if the answer is anything but no, compared with texting or chatting ahead of time. When you're planning to host family, grandchildren, friends with kids of theirs or your own children's friends, offering the information, "We don't own any guns," or "We don't have any unsecured guns," or "We own guns. They're unloaded and locked in a biometric safe that the kids' fingerprints can't access." It does double duty. It takes the pressure off whoever you're inviting from having to ask, and it continues to normalize the conversation so that others feel confident to and remember to ask themselves. Asking about guns in the home should be as natural as asking about any other safety issue. If it seems awkward at first, you can try making it part of your general safety conversation. You might try asking via email or text. Since 2015, when I lived in Texas next to a family who hunted regularly, I have asked at every family member's home or friend's home where my kids have been present and given any opportunity to be out of my sight. In all the times I've asked, I've never received an answer other than, "Thank you for asking," or "I should be asking that too, and I don't." Excuse me. My kids are 9 now, and no one has ever asked me. I also always offer the information before any child comes into my home. I do this to try to normalize the conversation so that others will begin doing the same. Overwhelmingly, gun owners do not want kids accessing their guns without their knowledge. Homes without kids present the majority of the time may not secure their guns. So when kids are present, it's important for parents to ask. The importance of asking was made clear to me in 2004 when my husband was deployed in Iraq and I was at a friend's home with another wife and her 3- and 4-year-old. When the kids arrived, they went upstairs to the main bedroom to watch a movie. After we'd been chatting for about 10 minutes, the homeowner gasped, jumped up, and ran to her room to retrieve and secure the loaded handgun that was on her nightstand. This was a woman who grew up around guns, whose family hunted. She'd been with her husband since she was 16, and he was a man who'd gone to a military college and was professionally weapons trained. This was a woman who was educated in guns, but she didn't have kids in her home, so she forgot her loaded handgun was on the nightstand. Never in a million years would she have intended these children to find her gun, but this is how unintentional shootings happen, and it's why it's vital to ask. Secured storage is associated with a 78% decreased risk of self-inflicted injury and an 85% decreased risk of unintentional firearm injury. Let's talk about recognizing the role of guns in suicide, the R. Access to a gun can mean the difference between life and death. As children grow older, you may consider talking about taking another look at your storage methods. If you've been using a simple cable lock, you may want to think about getting a gun safe. We all know how curious children can be, so as they grow older and more resourceful, we need to think accordingly. Also, if you know your loved one is in distress, you might want to consider temporarily removing a gun from your home. Why would you want to do that? It's important to consider that firearm suicide is uniquely lethal. 90% of suicide attempts using a gun end in death, and half of suicides in the US are gun suicides. But 90% of people who survive a suicide attempt will never attempt suicide again. So if you consider temporarily removing a gun from your home, how can you do that? Where could you bring it? Law enforcement are sometimes willing to temporarily store guns. Some licensed gun dealers or gun ranges are often willing to temporarily store guns. Or you can temporarily store your guns at the home of a friend or family member. To manage the risk for that friend or family member, you should lock any guns that you transfer and not provide the key or code. Depending on the laws in some states, the person agreeing to store the guns may first need a background check at a gun dealer or through law enforcement. Again, most people who attempt suicide do not die unless they use a gun. While 90% of suicide attempts with a gun result in death, 4% of suicide attempts by any other means of self-harm end in death. This contributes to the fact that 41% of child suicides involve a gun. The National Youth Survey conducted by the CDC showed that 20% of high school students have seriously considered attempting suicide within the last year. One study showed that 41% of adolescents in gun-owning households reported having easy access to guns in their home. As we discussed earlier, research shows that secure firearm storage is associated with a decreased risk of child firearm suicide. And as we mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, here are some important resources. If now it makes sense to write them down or take a picture. Some signs to look for when concerned that a loved one may be suicidal are hopelessness, sleeping too much or too little, prolonged sadness or depression, increased alcohol or drug use. And again, we have handout material with more information about how to get help if you recognize these or other warning signs in yourself or others. T is for tell, the power of being smart. There are different ways to commit to being smart. Please think about how you can ask about secure gun storage before your kids visit another home, and how you can share this information about your own home with other parents and family members. You can get involved with Be Smart in ways that vary from giving this presentation to attending events and giving out free gun locks, to approaching organizations that you frequent to ask them to consider displaying our reminder cards and brochures. One example is the Hartford Gun Club in my town. It's the oldest gun club in the country, and it stocks Be Smart reminder cards and brochures for member access to remind them about safe storage. This message does not have to be political or complicated. We just don't want kids accessing guns they shouldn't. We do not want one more story of a child unintentionally shooting themselves or someone else, and we want anyone with suicidal thoughts to get help, not to get their hands on a gun. Please think about how you can share the Be Smart message. That way we will save lives. It's by spreading awareness, and if you're interested in more information, you can text at any time SMART to 64433. So anytime texting SMART to 64433 gives you more information. Thank you so much. And then I'll stop.
Anyone have any questions?
Can you just unmute?
I got it now. What connection does your organization have with school systems themselves?
So it can vary dramatically. Some school systems across the country have Be Smart branded cards that are basically that acronym with the sort of definitions underneath, and they go home every year as a back to school packet. Some school systems have partnered with local hospitals, and the hospital has the same information but sticks their brand on it, so they pay for it, and those go home at random times throughout the year with students. My school system, the superintendent gave the link in an email that went to all parents system-wide for more information on safe gun storage, and then it linked to the Be Smart website so that parents could access it digitally. My town, other towns have hosted, the PTO or the school system itself has hosted this presentation either in person or virtually. I'm just waiting on the superintendent to give us a date, and then it's going to be accessible to parents and community members in our town. Trying to think of what else has been done, but it kind of runs the gamut from schools deciding, oh, there was Houston ISD is one of the largest in the country. They partnered with the local law enforcement, and law enforcement took the language of Be Smart. We have a template that superintendents or school folks could choose to use. They branded it with Houston Police Department information, and then it went home to parents, and there was a portion where you actually had to sign and return it so that you'd been made aware that you know, this is a safety issue. School systems are here to keep kids safe. One way that you can keep kids safe is to make sure that they don't have access to loaded unsecured guns, and then you had to sign it and return it back to school. So it's kind of run the gamut. Be Smart is happy when school systems, police departments, whoever uses what we've written that is branded as Be Smart, and we're also happy when police departments especially, or school systems, want to kind of cut and paste the information and just put it out without any logos. Great. The information is the important part, so that's totally fine too. But those are some of the most recent, I think, examples that I've talked about. So lots of different things.
I was just curious to see how that information is being transmitted, because oftentimes you hear when there's an organization talking about guns, it becomes so political rather than being personal when it comes to family members and children who don't grow up with knowledge unless they about guns and so on, unless they get it from their family members or people who care.
Right. So that's why school systems, I'm assuming, some have chosen to basically copy and paste it and send it out as is, which is fine. But I think I'd mentioned that Be Smart is a 501c3, so it's a completely apolitical educational organization. Moms Demand Action is also sort of under the Everytown for Gun Safety umbrella, but it's a 501c4, so it has political goals and aims, and it lobbies, and it puts its weight behind legislation in various states to try to move that forward. But it's never the twain shall meet. They're completely separate. You can volunteer for both, but it's very strict. You can't make donations. You know, its donations go to one or the other. You can't use Be Smart money to buy Moms Demand Action things. You can't use Moms Demand Action money to pay for Be Smart things. You can't wear your t-shirt from one event to the next. I would never wear my Be Smart t-shirt to go to a re-elect, you know, Chris rally. It's just very separate. So in that way, Be Smart's kind of the easier ask a lot of times if volunteers want to get involved, or if they want to spread the message that this is a purely educational campaign. There's two main goals. We'd like to reduce suicide, and we don't want kids to get a hold of guns. And that's a real, no one's arguing against that. So that's why it's an easier kind of an in if folks are going to their select people, or, you know, governors or those types of people, to say, you know, my town hall, I went and sat down with the first select woman. We don't see eye to eye on many things. But I wanted these available, these pamphlets available next to the pistol permits. And I wanted to make sure that everybody that was going home with a signed pistol permit was going home with a Be Smart card. And she was happy to, because there's nothing about the information, please don't leave loaded, unlocked guns around the house when kids are there, that you can really argue with. Just like, when I have a conversation with the manager of the gun club, he, I know, doesn't lock his guns when he's at home because he lives by himself. Fine, I'm not going to change your mind on that. But he also knows that whenever the grandkids come over, everything is locked, because he knew where his parents' guns were when he was a child, and it's not a risk he's willing to take. He knows how lethal they are. So we share that, goal, that purpose. You can't exist as a gun club if safety isn't on that level, a shared goal. So there are definitely sort of places where you can, insert yourself into the conversation where you maybe wouldn't think you normally could, because it's such a narrow focus.
Thank you for your explanation.
Yeah, I was just wondering when Be Smart got started as an organization, and if you have any evidence, anecdotal or otherwise, that it's made a difference.
I know, so it was 2017, and it's sort of a fortunate, unfortunate. A lot of gun secure storage campaigns and volunteer nonprofits kind of started around the same time, and data shows that yes, they did make a difference. And in hospital systems, there's one in, I think it's St. Louis Children's. They now have gun locks available at all of their emergency departments, and you can get one on their website for free, mailed to you. And they've made it a policy that in all of their emergency departments, questioning involving children for any injury, broken arm, it doesn't matter. Across the board, it's the same, like, do you feel well and healthy? Do you wear a bike helmet? Those kinds of things. Do you have secured guns in your home? And they've noticed a statistically significant difference with when they're asking who has guns that are secured and who doesn't. And similarly, data has shown that around the same time that these organizations, around 2016, 2017, it did make a difference. The unfortunate part is that right during COVID and since then, gun ownership has grown exponentially. And so it hasn't grown at the same rate. We were making a lot of headway, and then millions of people bought guns. And so it's going to be a little bit more of a catch up. Some states are starting to look at legislation where locks will be forced to be made available, or go along with a gun purchase. So that's kind of that may be another block to see if it makes a difference, but that's the fortunate part. So yes, the data has shown that. Also, unfortunately, the amount of guns that have been purchased, it outgrew the rate at which that was making a difference.
I think we have an extra special responsibility to make sure that the message gets out, particularly because that's the incidents with Sandy Hook. I mean, if you really stop and think about that, with children and guns, Connecticut was at the forefront of a terrible tragedy. And regardless of how it all began, I think it's our responsibility as adults who care about children, who care about other human beings, to make sure that we're doing what is the honorable and the right thing to, maintain for safety. So thank you for explaining everything to us.
And I think it's really important that I think a lot of non-gun owners who don't have an interest, would never, want to shoot a gun, have a gun, not preempting play dates with the same information that they're looking for someone else to, hopefully share. I think that does a disservice. I think it's really helpful on so many levels when you share with people that come to your home, we just so we don't own any guns, we don't have any cats, we don't have any dogs, we don't own any guns, are there allergies, etc. I think it goes a long way, because there's a huge population of parents of kids that, because they don't have an interest or don't own a gun, they're maybe they're asking when they go to play dates, and that's great, But if you're really kind of playing with a similar group of like-minded individuals, you then kind of get out of the habit. And then you go to someone, you go to Uncle Tony's house and you didn't realize that he got a gun in the last year, and Uncle Tony lives alone, and all of a sudden, your kids could wander in and find something. So I think it's helpful when you have kids or grandkids and you're asking. That's amazing. But the flip side is, I don't let kids come to my home unless I've told the parents. My husband went to West Point. We have a commemorative graduation gun. We don't own bullets for it. It is in a biometric safe with our fingerprints. I don't necessarily look like a gun. I'm not a gun owner, but we don't look like a home that has a gun necessarily. But I think it's really helpful. Like when Be Smart has folks who own guns, it's really helpful to push that narrative forward that, they look like you, they look like me. I'm wanting to offer this information, so please ask it the next time you go to somebody else's house, because you don't necessarily know what's there. And that's just the unfortunate truth, that if you don't know, if you don't ask, you're not going to know, and it's just too important. And if I get an answer that doesn't jive with my philosophy, then I'm glad I got that answer. That's not a place my kids are going to play. It's just not worth it.
Thank
To
you.
your point, Joanna, I think gun ownership is extremely underestimated. Non-gun owners don't realize how many guns are around. And as an example, I was with a group of people and discussing this topic, and they said, "Oh, no one in our community owns guns." And other people say, "Oh, yes, they do."
Yeah.
And there are more guns in this country than people, and somebody owns them, and not one,
Right.
other than the people who own 40 guns, there are lots of people who own guns, especially since the start of the pandemic.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. It's surprising. I know when my a friend of mine that does this, and she's held multiple tabling events with free gun locks in Avon. Avon is an affluent community in northern Connecticut, and it had one of the highest rates of pistol permits and gun ownership in the last 2 years. And the police said, you wouldn't believe how many folks are coming to us to get fingerprints done for their pistol permits. And my first select person said the same thing. She said until she was in this position, she wouldn't have thought. We're a tiny little town. My town is 5,500 people. And she said, I'm signing two of these a week. It's not that everyone that gets a permit is going to own a gun, but you're exactly right. It's not, if you're not sort of in the culture, you're probably sort of not aware of, who has a hand-me-down gun, who has something that they was willed to them, or, that they used to be interested. My husband wouldn't buy a gun now, but when you're, 22 and you're graduating and you're going into the military, it was the thing to do, and everybody bought it, and it's engraved and it's sort of a showpiece. It's never been fired. Now it's a very expensive piece of metal that sits in a very expensive safe, and no one ever sees it. But it was just a different time, and wouldn't make the decision now, but it's like, now what do you do with it? So it's in a gun safe. It's just a kind of a good prop to say, I don't look like a typical person who has a gun in their home, but you should ask me. And that's why I don't let people in my home without offering it, because I'm going to ask you. So here's the information about me. Joanna, and someday someone will ask me, but it hasn't happened yet.
Joanna, thank you for this presentation, and I was really happy to hear that pediatricians are beginning to ask questions of families about, secure gun storage in the way that they ask about.
It's not as much as I'd hope, but it's both. Be Smart and asking about safe gun storage in general has been endorsed by the American Medical Association, the American Academy of Pediatrics, every major hospital network. I was just talking to a physician in pediatrics from Harvard. There are resources on the American Academy of Pediatrics website. There are modules with videos to show you how to ask and what to say. The gentleman who led the American Medical Association wrote testimony and was in front of Congress asking that certain things be passed that included money for, firearm prevention organizations and whatnot, because in his words, like physicians and pediatricians in particular have a unique position to ask about health and safety and welfare. And many don't think they can, don't as a practice, don't know how, think it's awkward. And so that's sort of a side project is I'm working with a physician that I know and a physician that's part of Be Smart to try to get a one page with some clickable links for more information. But to put it out there to more, I mean, my pediatricians never asked me. And I've tried to get them to use Be Smart stuff. And it's just tricky. I think it's just going to take a little bit longer, but there's no law, there's no federal or state law that prohibits any physician, especially pediatricians, from asking, and it's endorsed by every major medical association. There's just a disconnect still between what your association is telling you should be doing and what you're, I think, educated to and know the wording to do comfortably. So that sort of side project that we're hoping might be helpful to some physicians who say like, I probably should, but what do I say? What if they get mad? What if this? What if that? What do I, and giving some information that the associations have already put out there, but just kind of making it a little bit more accessible.
Now, something else that might be useful, I don't know if high schools do this anymore, or even if this was typical of high schools. My son is now 34 years old, but when he was in high school, the administration offered parents the opportunity to attest in writing to the fact that we committed that whenever kids were at our home, they would be supervised. The kids would not be provided with alcohol, that drug use would not be allowed. And I have no idea if high schools do anything like this anymore, but wow, that guns in your house are secured would be a really good question to add to that, if that's anything that high schools even ask anymore. But in my son's high school, then this list was published for any of us who chose to participate. So we knew what other parents were on the same wavelength.
That's interesting. I've not heard of that. I'm guessing superintendents and principals would kind of think it was a risky thing that they'd get backlash for, which is why a lot don't do other things. But I feel like it's, you're chipping away at it. Every time you can say, well, Houston ISD did it, and so-and-so did it, and Medford did it. And, as soon as, unfortunately, we had an incident in my town in December, a first grader brought 2 handguns to school, and there was no incident per se beyond that, and the family member has been arrested. But that was a real easy, I'd mentioned before, the superintendent and I are on a first name basis, and I mentioned before different things, but I was like, here's the in. So I really kind of hit hard with a lot of, this is who did it here, and this is who did what here, and how and why, and I think that's helpful for others to see. Somebody did it before and it went well, and parents were behind it, and parents were grateful, and all those little things I think help chip away and help others, learn the same thing. And after that incident, we had a school safety meeting, a district meeting, and one of the parents said, this really doesn't seem like it's an issue that the school really should be solving. It's not an issue until it gets to school, but it starts at home. So how do we do that? And the principal and superintendent looked at me and kind of said, so Joanna, and I could give a little bit of a spiel, and I think it was really helpful for both the superintendent and that principal to see how well it was received by parents. I'd offered to do a presentation and hadn't been taken up on it until that conversation in that room happened, and the parents were saying, where can we get more of this? Where can we get the cards? Can we put it in our newsletter? Can we get it on the school website? Could we have a presentation? And then all of a sudden, I think that builds the confidence, and it can be like dominoes. Once one school system does it, you can show it to the neighboring town. And when things are well received, it's just a lot easier of an ask, when you're the 10th or the 100th than when you're the first.
Just in case anybody wants any of the handout or the cards or anything, There are some in the synagogue, but I have dozens more. So I'll bring them to the synagogue and put them on the table or on the little card holder over there. And I have buttons that I've been wearing proudly. If you want to do that too, just
It's a good
That'd be fun.
conversation starter. And I like that I like the postcard size cards, especially because it's really self-explanatory. You know, you can pick up a card and somebody can get it. You don't have to necessarily, explain it to someone. So I like those a lot for, leaving in the gun store and, the gun range and at the town hall, that kind of thing.
It mysteriously appear in different places.
Yeah, we do ask permission, but I like that idea.
I put it on my HOA table and they go, huh, tell me around.
Does every state have a chapter or?
Yes. Yep, there are representatives in every state. I don't know how many. A lot of times it's divided by regionally, like typically there's a mom's demand of different regions. Similarly, Be Smart is usually regional. Connecticut's so small, we just meet up via Zoom and then kind of divide and conquer, as opposed to having different groups, because that's what makes sense for us. I know California has 1 million, so they're probably more regional, but yeah, it's definitely across the country.
And how active I mean, you're presenting to a faith group, so to speak. How active are churches in getting this information, distributing it, etc.?
It's varied. I think it just kind of depends on who kind of raises the torch of I'd like to have this. I mean, definitely it's a common kind of a thing, but common isn't, I'm not doing one a month, but it's just as likely, I think, as others are, and different states have different focuses. We've kind of focused on doing kind of spreading the message on where we already are. I mean, presentations are wonderful and I think they're great, but a lot of us still have youngish kids that are in Connecticut, and so we're already frequenting these places. Let's ask there. So the gals in Avon decided they're making a big list of like play places like My Gym and Little Gym, and there were ones I hadn't heard of because my kiddos are 9 now, and asking those folks if we could put some cards, because this is where we're, it's kind of does double duty again. It's both where a lot of parents bring their kids, but it's where I'm already going. So instead of racking our brains to try to do different things, we thought, I have a town hall. Why can't I have some cards there? And there's a gun range in my town. There's a gun range in, 2 towns from you. So we sort of started doing a little bit more of that instead of trying to reach larger groups, especially with COVID. It was really hard. We had to kind of regroup and think about, we're busy. What are we capable of? How can we make best use of our time? And so that was something our state focused on. Other states have focused on different things. Some have tried really hard, like I said, to have a hospital group be able to sponsor to send the cards home in the largest school district every year. So, and that took a while. There was a gal from Guilford that worked really hard to work with the Connecticut chapter of the American Academy of Pediatrics to have them put out some messaging and support. That took a while. They did get it, and it was wonderful. It was unfortunately March of 2020, so it wasn't something we could then like build upon. So that's along, with things that we want to have done this year. Again, if we could put it out again, and that's just helpful to then, if you're going to go to your own pediatrician, or we have folks that work with Hartford Healthcare Systems or Yale Systems, to be able to go and try to get information disseminated top down. Those kinds of things are just really helpful, that folks are already on board, that you can kind of turn to in case you get pushed back. So yeah, we're happy to go. Anyone who'll have us, basically.
Thank you so much. I actually learned, secure gun storage. What is it? What does secure mean? And that was actually news to me.
Yeah, unloaded and locked. Those are
Yeah,
my
yeah,
two favorite phrases. Yep.
absolutely. Well, thank you so much, and I hope everyone learned as much as I did, and just spread the word. And it, as I said, I will make lots of materials available. Just, you can email me also if you like.
It was a well-done presentation.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if
Thank
you
you
know
very
of
much.
anyone who missed the presentation within a few days, I hope we'll have it up on the website.
Great.
And I'll just toss out a reminder that a week from tonight, which will be March 1st, believe it or not, right? Yeah. We will be having a film on Becky's Zoom, a documentary called I Too, followed by a conversation with the producer. So hope to see
Sounds
you
great.
again next week. And Joanna, so lovely to meet you. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope you all have a lovely evening.
You too.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.